ground plan of Stonehenge, which of course goes back to Neolithic times, which would have been at least 2,000 years before the building of the circular temple, we discover that it's a series of concentric circles. The inner circle of this is the bluestone horseshoe made out of a type of rhyolite, an igneous rock called bluestone. And here we can look at the dimensions of the various circles composing Stonehenge. We look at the sarsen stone circle, which is the outer one, this one, and we discover that it's 100.8 feet drawn on the center line. The outer face is 105.6. Now if you multiply that times 5, I mentioned earlier, 105.6 times 5 gives us 1/10 of a mile. So that suggests that that the mile was a unit of measurement being used. The average length of the sarsen stone lintels, which is this, 10.56. So this average length of the uprights and the lintels that separate them is 10.56 feet. Multiply that by 10, you have the overall diameter of the structure. Multiply that by 50, and you have exactly the British mile that we've inherited, which is now the American mile, since the British don't use that mile anymore, they use kilometers. So we here in America are essentially preserving that ancient sacred unit of measurement that was being used by the builders of Stonehenge. But we go further here, and we will go back and we'll see that the bluestone circle, 79.2 feet. So you've got the bluestone circle here, 79.2 feet. The bluestone horseshoe, which is laid out tangent to a circle, that is 39.6 feet, right here. So they bear the relationship to each other as the diameter of the Earth, which is 7,920 to 3,960, equals the 79.2 of the bluestone circle to this circle. So we have 79.2 and 39.6. So you see how the very same numbers are built in right there. And that 39.6 was the exact width of the chapel, St. Mary's Chapel at Glastonbury. So you can see that chapel, if you look at the underlying geometry of Stonehenge, you'll see that there's concealed in there the Seal of Solomon, linking the size of these concentric circles to one another. And if we take this rectangle right here, which is in the relationship of the square root of 3 to 1, we discovered that that's precisely the size of this chapel that was the first, according to some, built 2,000 years later. And it links the two. It links a common geometry. There's also the squaring of the circle. I mentioned earlier that the Great Pyramid was a solution to the squaring of the circle problem. And Stonehenge is also a solution, provides us with a solution to the squaring of the circle. The squaring of the circle was the preeminent problem of classical geometry, because these were considered to be symbolical of the two disparate realms of phenomena. The square was all things measurable, rational, finite, material. The circle was all things immeasurable, infinite, spiritual, things that can't be measured. So the squaring of the circle was a problem that resolved the two. You cannot, in geometry, create, using the methods of classical geometry, which allows you only to use the compass and the straight edge. You're only allowed to use the compass and the straight edge, because it was believed that that's what the tools used by the Creator was, a compass and a straight edge, a means of creating arcs and a means of creating straight lines. And when you had those two things at your disposal, you could create the whole infinite realm of phenomena, manifested phenomena, by linking the arcs created by the compass and the straight line. Using those instruments, there is no way of creating geometrically a square and circle of exactly equal perimeter. All there are is various ways of approximating it to a greater or lesser degree of precision. And this is what we find in both the geometry of the Great Pyramid and the geometry of Stonehenge provide us with ways of solving those problems to a high degree of accuracy. So what we have here is, you'll notice you have a square, and within that square is a circle. We say that this circle is inscribed within the square. At the same time, we also have a second circle that clips the square. See how it clips the corners of the square? Well, if you were actually go out and measure, take a tape measure and go out and measure this geometry, what you'd discover is within the limits of a standard tape measure that we use, there would be no discernible difference in the perimeter of this square and the circumference of this outer circle. And essentially is the solution of the squaring of the circle exercise. But what's really interesting here to me is that when you go from the center of the monument out to the bluestone circle right here, you've gone half of this number, which is 39.6. If you go from here, the radius of the larger circle, you've gone 50.4 feet. If you subtract the 39.6 from the 50.4, you get 10.8 feet. Well, remember, the moon has a radius of 1,080 miles. So what you have here is that if you then use this as the diameter of the Earth, this then is, or the radius of the Earth, then this is the radius of the moon. So you draw a circle on this, and you draw this circle, and now you have the Earth-Moon proportions exactly laid out. So that's what you see here in this squaring of the circle exercise that provides us with the ground plan of Stonehenge. We find that this circle is 79.2 feet, and this circle is 21.6 feet in diameter. So it relates exactly as the Earth-Moon. So here's the Earth, here's the Moon, and here's the diameter of the bluestone circle, 79.2, and here's the diameter of this little hypothetical circle that has been drawn right here with that difference right there as the radius. Now, how is it that those proportions end up here? A coincidence? Does it mean that the builders of Stonehenge had measured the Earth and the Moon? Maybe, not necessarily. It does imply to me, though, that if they were constructing this with reference to some ancient canon of cosmology, it may then follow that they're automatically incorporating these proportions into their structures. But then again, on the other hand, perhaps they were deliberately and consciously setting out. At this stage of our knowledge, we can't say one way or the other. But either way, the implications of it are very interesting and very profound. Oh, let me write down this number, 10.56 and 105.6. And remember, if we take this number times 50 equals 1 mile. And the fact that they were using this and that it is an even subdivision of the mile does suggest strongly that the mile was in use at the time Stonehenge was built, some 4,000 to 4,500 years ago. The number 10.56 is significant, as we'll see. Also, if we look at the ground plan of the Glastonbury Abbey, and here's the chapel, which has the 68.6 times 39.6 dimensions, it happens to be on a line of latitude that if you project due east, it pierces the center of Stonehenge. So it's almost like geodetically or geographically, the guys who laid this out 2,000 years after that were nonetheless either consciously and deliberately or unconsciously linking these two structures through time and space with a common geometry and a common geography, a common geodetic positioning on the planet. And further, it just so happens that this latitude is just over 51 degrees north, which means it's almost the pyramid angle from the equator. going from the center of the Earth. And in fact, if you were to take the Earth, slice it across, and draw from the equator to the Earth's center, and then out to the latitude of Stonehenge, you wouldn't be able to distinguish that angle from the actual 51 degrees 51 minutes, which is the angle of the pyramid. And that's the magic angle that leads to the solution of the squaring of the circle. It leads to the golden section and so forth. And here is a reconstruction of the original ground plan of the Abbey, which is now in ruins. And this was developed by an architect who was hired by the ecclesiastical authorities in the early part of the 20th century. And he did an extensive survey of the grounds and realized that it was laid out on a grid of squares that were 74 feet on a side. Well, he ended up getting in trouble and getting fired from his position, because when he exposed this, he said, well, it's built on a grid of squares 74 feet on a side, and the full length of the Abbey, if you count, is 9 squares. Well, 9 squares times 74 turns out to be 666 feet. The number of who? Behemoth, the beast. Who is the beast? See, this is one of the mysteries. I referred to it earlier. The number 603 score and whatever. Yeah. It ends up being 666 feet, though. I mean, 666, yes, 666 feet. So the fathers of the Church of England didn't like that, and they didn't like where he was going with this. So he was relieved of his duties. But why would they be trying to embody the number 666 in a Christian church? Well, once you get into the study, I showed you earlier the numerical and mathematical and geometrical basis of language. There are some very important and interesting clues there, because there's some very interesting words and phrases and names that come up with the number 666. And it's not what you would think.